The people who laugh the loudest at a stranger are often the least prepared to discover who they truly insulted. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe every person deserves respect, no matter how they dress, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Maya Brooks. Maya Brooks steadied the silver tray against her palm as she crossed the polished marble floor of Bella Vita, one of Manhattan's most exclusive Italian restaurants. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm golden light across white linen tables, while the soft melody of a grand piano floated through the room like a whispered promise of elegance. Every glass sparkled. Every smile appeared rehearsed. Every guest seemed determined to prove they belonged among the city's elite. Maya had worked there for 11 months, long enough to recognize that true wealth rarely announced itself. The loudest voices usually belonged to those desperate to be noticed. Table 12 needs another bottle. Her manager, Brandon Cole, called sharply without bothering to look at her. And don't keep Mrs. Hayes waiting. Yes, sir. She adjusted her black apron and turned toward the VIP section. That was when the front door opened. An elderly Asian woman stepped quietly inside. Her silver hair gathered into a neat bun beneath a simple cream-colored hat. Her beige cardigan had clearly been mended more than once, and sensible shoes peeked from beneath a modest navy skirt. Nothing about her appearance matched the glittering room surrounding her, yet she carried herself with calm dignity, her back perfectly straight despite the years written across her gentle face. She paused near the entrance, looking around with polite uncertainty before offering a warm smile to the hostess. I believe my son reserved a table for me, she said softly. The hostess glanced at the reservation screen, frowned, then forced a professional smile. May I have the name? Before the woman could answer, a sharply dressed blonde seated nearby rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, wonderful, she muttered loudly enough for half the room to hear. Apparently anyone can wander into Bella Vita now. A few guests chuckled behind expensive wine glasses. The elderly woman lowered her gaze for only a second before smiling again, pretending not to hear. Maya felt something tighten inside her chest. She had seen that smile before. It was the smile people wore when preserving their dignity mattered more than defending themselves. Carrying a tray of sparkling water, Maya walked toward the entrance. Good evening, ma'am, she said warmly. Please don't worry. We'll find your reservation. The older woman thanked her with kind eyes that carried a quiet exhaustion Maya couldn't quite explain. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Before Maya could answer, Brandon strode across the lobby. What seems to be the problem? The hostess explained. Brandon barely looked at the woman before sighing impatiently. If there's no reservation under her name, she'll need to wait outside until it's sorted. I was told to come here at 7. The woman replied gently, checking an old wristwatch. Mrs. Victoria Hayes, wrapped in diamonds and confidence, laughed openly from her table. Maybe her son forgot she exists. Several nearby diners laughed with her. The words landed harder than anyone realized. For the briefest moment, the elderly woman's fingers tightened around the worn leather handbag she carried. Her smile remained, but the light behind her eyes dimmed almost imperceptibly. Maya stepped forward. Sir, she said carefully to Brandon. Perhaps we could let her sit while we verify the reservation. She's been standing. Brandon's expression darkened immediately. Maya, I don't remember asking for your opinion. The restaurant grew noticeably quieter. Dozens of curious eyes shifted toward the young black waitress who had just dared to interrupt her manager in front of wealthy patrons. Maya didn't move. Neither did the elderly woman. Outside, a sleek black motorcade slowed silently beside the restaurant entrance, unnoticed by everyone inside. And within moments, Bella Vita would learn that the quiet old woman they had chosen to humiliate was not waiting for just any son. The silence lasted only 2 seconds, but inside Bella Vita it felt long enough for everyone to decide whose side they were on. Brandon Cole folded his arms, the perfectly pressed sleeves of his designer suit making him appear more interested in protecting the restaurant's reputation than the elderly woman standing quietly before him. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. Without confirmation, I can't allow you to remain in the lobby. We have important guests arriving. The woman nodded politely. I understand. Her voice remained gentle. No anger. No argument. Only quiet acceptance. She glanced once more at the old silver watch around her wrist. 7 o'clock had come and gone. Whoever she had been waiting for was late. Maya couldn't explain why that tiny gesture unsettled her. It wasn't disappointment she saw. It was concern, as though the elderly woman wasn't worried about herself. She was worried about someone else. "I'm sure my son wouldn't forget," she whispered almost to herself. Perhaps something delayed him. Victoria Hayes laughed into her champagne. "That's adorable." Her husband smirked. "So your imaginary son booked a table in one of Manhattan's finest restaurants." Several nearby diners exchanged amused glances. Someone muttered, "Probably trying to get a free meal." The laughter spread from one table to another like ripples across still water. Maya felt heat rise behind her eyes. She had grown up watching her grandmother endure similar moments. People mistaking kindness for weakness, humility for poverty, silence for ignorance. She had promised herself long ago that if she ever witnessed someone being humiliated simply because they appeared powerless, she would never become another silent spectator. She stepped closer. "Ma'am," Maya said softly, "would you like a glass of water while we sort this out?" The older woman smiled with genuine gratitude. "That would be lovely, dear." Brandon's jaw tightened. "Maya," his tone alone carried a warning. She turned. "Yes, sir. I said this situation is under control. I only thought, I don't pay you to think." The words echoed far louder than Brandon intended. Conversations throughout the restaurant slowed. Forks paused halfway to expensive plates. Even the pianist stumbled over a note before recovering. Maya lowered her eyes briefly, swallowing the sting of public humiliation. She could apologize. Walk away. Pretend none of this concerned her. It would be the safest decision. Instead, she looked back at the elderly woman. Standing alone beneath glittering chandeliers, she suddenly seemed impossibly small. Not because she lacked dignity, because everyone around her had decided she deserved none. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole," Maya replied calmly. "But she's someone's mother." Victoria let out an exaggerated sigh. "And now the waitress wants to lecture us." She waved a jeweled hand dismissively. "If you hire people who can't stay in their lane, this place really is losing its standards." A chorus of quiet agreement followed. Brandon's face reddened. "Maya Brooks." His voice became dangerously controlled. "You are one sentence away from losing your job." The elderly woman gently touched Maya's wrist. "It's all right, dear." Her hand was warm despite the cold marble lobby. "I've lived a long life." She smiled with heartbreaking grace. "A little embarrassment won't hurt me." Those words somehow hurt Maya even more. No one should become so accustomed to disrespect that they accepted it as part of life. Before she could answer, the restaurant doors opened once again. This time no one laughed. 5 men in tailored black suits entered first, scanning every corner with disciplined precision. Each moved with military confidence, discreet earpieces hidden beneath neatly trimmed hair. The conversations inside Bella Vita faded almost instantly. Even Brandon straightened. The atmosphere changed without anyone understanding why. The bodyguards didn't speak. They simply formed 2 silent lines near the entrance. Then everyone heard it. The low rumble of another engine stopping outside. A long black luxury sedan. Its glossy surface reflected the golden lights spilling from the restaurant windows. One of the guards stepped forward and opened the rear passenger door with practiced respect. Inside the lobby, the elderly woman looked toward the entrance. For the first time since she had arrived, relief softened her tired eyes. She whispered only 4 quiet words. "My son is here now." No one, not Victoria, not Brandon, not the dozens of wealthy guests staring toward the entrance, had the slightest idea that the man about to walk through those doors ruled an empire built on fear, loyalty, and absolute power. The restaurant doors revolved slowly, almost soundlessly, yet every conversation inside Bella Vita seemed to dissolve into silence at the same moment. The first man entered with measured confidence, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. Then another. Then 3 more. None of them wore visible weapons. None of them spoke. They didn't have to. Years of disciplined precision showed in every synchronized movement. Their sharp eyes swept across the dining room, lingering on exits, windows, balconies, reflections in polished mirrors. They weren't looking for elegance. They were looking for threats. Victoria Hayes frowned. Who on earth are they? One waiter instinctively stepped aside. Another nearly dropped a tray of champagne flutes. Even Brandon, who moments earlier had spoken with complete authority, suddenly found himself smoothing his jacket and standing straighter without understanding why. The elderly woman smiled softly. "My son worries too much." She almost sounded embarrassed. Maya looked from the woman to the line of silent bodyguards. Something no longer fit. Nothing about the gentle lady before her suggested a life surrounded by men trained like elite security professionals. One guard pressed a finger discreetly against the earpiece hidden beneath his collar. "Principal arriving." His voice was barely above a whisper. Outside, another luxury vehicle rolled to a stop. Unlike the others, this one was armored. Its deep black finish reflected the city lights like polished obsidian. The rear door opened. An expensive Italian leather shoe touched the pavement first. Then another. A tall Korean man stepped out with unhurried confidence. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit tailored so perfectly it seemed sculpted onto him. His complexion carried the warm golden tone of East Asian skin, while intricate black tattoos climbed from beneath his white collar, disappearing along his neck before vanishing beneath perfectly fitted sleeves. His expression remained unreadable, cold, controlled, completely still, the kind of stillness that belonged to men who had never needed to raise their voices to command obedience. Daniel Kong. Few people in New York had ever seen him in person. Most only knew whispered stories. The Korean businessman whose companies bought hotels overnight. The investor who never lost negotiations. The mysterious billionaire surrounded by impossible levels of security. Only a handful knew the darker truth hidden beneath newspaper headlines. Daniel Kong ruled one of the most powerful criminal organizations operating quietly across 3 continents. Power had taught him one simple habit. Observe first. Act later. As he entered Bella Vita, his dark eyes immediately searched the room. Not the expensive guests. Not the restaurant manager. Not the wealthy socialites. Only one face mattered. His mother's. He spotted her instantly, standing exactly where she should never have been. Alone, holding her worn handbag with both hands. And beside her stood a young black waitress. Daniel noticed something else. His mother's smile. It was still there, but he recognized the tiny sadness hiding behind it. No one understood Eleanor Kong better than her son. When she smiled like that, someone had hurt her. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. One of his security chiefs leaned closer. "Sir." Daniel raised one finger. Not yet. He wanted to understand. Across the lobby, Maya had no idea who the newcomer was. She only noticed that every employee in the restaurant suddenly looked nervous. Even Victoria Hayes stopped talking. The mysterious man walked slowly across the marble floor. His footsteps were almost silent. His gaze never left the elderly woman. Brandon hurried forward with an overly enthusiastic smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Bella Vita. Do you have a reservation?" Daniel didn't answer. Brandon continued awkwardly. "If you're here for dinner, I'd be happy to escort." Daniel walked straight past him as though he didn't exist. The manager froze mid-sentence. Guests turned in their chairs. Every eye followed the elegant stranger crossing the restaurant. Victoria whispered to her husband, "Who does he think he is?" No one answered. Daniel stopped only a few feet from the elderly woman. For one long heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then the stern, tattooed man whom countless rivals feared lowered his head with quiet respect. His cold expression softened into something almost childlike. "Mother," he said gently, "I am sorry I kept you waiting." And in that single moment, the atmosphere inside Bella Vita changed forever. No one expected the most intimidating man in the room to bow before the quietest woman. The image lingered in absolute silence. Daniel Kong remained with his head slightly lowered, his broad shoulders no longer carrying the cold authority that had entered Bella Vita only moments earlier. In front of his mother, he looked less like the man newspapers described as an untouchable billionaire and more like an ordinary son apologizing for arriving late. "I'm sorry, mother," he repeated softly. Traffic delayed the convoy. Eleanor smiled with the same warmth Maya had noticed from the beginning. "You came." Her fingers gently brushed a crease from Daniel's lapel, as if he were still the little boy she had once dressed for school. "That's all that matters." For a brief second, Daniel allowed himself to smile. It transformed his face completely. The severe lines softened. The calculating eyes warmed. Even the tattoos climbing beneath his collar seemed less intimidating beneath the restaurant's golden lights. Then he noticed something. His mother's handbag. Its leather strap had been twisted tightly around her trembling fingers. A habit she had developed years ago whenever she tried to hide that someone had upset her. Daniel's smile disappeared. Slowly. Almost invisibly. What happened? He asked. His voice remained calm. Too calm. Eleanor shook her head. It was nothing. Daniel looked directly into her eyes. He had spent his entire life learning to detect lies from enemies, rivals, politicians, and business partners. His mother had never learned to hide anything from him. It wasn't nothing. She hesitated. I simply arrived before you. And there was a misunderstanding with the reservation. Daniel glanced toward Brandon. The restaurant manager instantly forced another smile. Sir, everything has already been resolved. Just a small mix-up. Daniel said nothing. His attention shifted instead toward Maya. She still stood beside Eleanor, still holding the untouched glass of water she had offered several minutes earlier. Unlike everyone else, she hadn't stepped backward after realizing who Daniel was. She had stayed exactly where she had been, protecting an old woman she believed was alone. Daniel noticed that. He noticed everything. What is your name? He asked quietly. Maya Brooks, sir. Were you helping my mother? Maya hesitated. I was only trying to make sure she wasn't standing alone. Daniel studied her for another long moment. No fear. No attempt to impress him. No expectation of reward. Just quiet honesty. Before he could respond, Victoria Hayes stood from her table, smoothing the expensive fabric of her designer dress. She laughed lightly, trying to reclaim the attention that had shifted away from her. Honestly, everyone is making far too much of this. She lifted her champagne glass with practiced elegance. It was simply an unfortunate misunderstanding. Daniel slowly turned toward her. The temperature in the room seemed to fall. And you are? Victoria Hayes. She smiled confidently. My husband and I are longtime patrons here. She gestured carelessly toward Eleanor. Your mother walked in without confirmation. We merely questioned whether she belonged here. The last sentence echoed across the silent dining room. Whether she belonged here. Daniel repeated the words silently inside his mind. Belonged. He looked back at his mother. The old cardigan. The repaired shoes. The worn handbag she refused to replace because it had been a gift from his late father. He remembered every sacrifice hidden behind those ordinary belongings. She had cleaned office buildings before sunrise. Worked weekends sewing clothes. Skipped meals so her son could stay in school. Every luxury Daniel possessed had been built upon the invisible years of her sacrifice. And someone had looked at that woman and decided she didn't belong. His jaw tightened. Very slightly. The bodyguards noticed immediately. Several shifted their weight almost imperceptibly. Not because they had received an order. Because they had served Daniel long enough to recognize the dangerous silence that always came before judgment. Daniel looked once more at Maya. Miss Brooks. Yes, sir. You've been honest with me. He paused. So now I'd like everyone else in this room to be just as honest. His eyes swept slowly across Brandon, Victoria, the surrounding guests, and finally settled on the security camera mounted discreetly above the entrance. Let's find out exactly how my mother was treated while she waited for me. The request was delivered without a single raised word, yet it carried more weight than a shouted command. Daniel Kong continued looking at the security camera above the entrance, his expression unreadable. Bring me the footage, he said. Brandon swallowed. Sir, the recordings are handled by corporate. It could take, now, one word. Nothing more. The head of Daniel's security detail stepped toward the manager. I believe my employer said now. The firmness in his voice left no room for negotiation. Brandon nodded quickly and hurried toward the office behind the reception desk, his polished shoes clicking nervously across the marble floor. The dining room remained strangely still. No one resumed eating. No one returned to their conversations. Even the pianist quietly removed his hands from the keys. People sensed they were no longer watching an awkward misunderstanding. They were witnessing judgment. Daniel gently pulled out a chair for his mother. Please sit. Eleanor smiled. You've always worried too much. I learned that from you. She laughed softly. For the first time since entering Bella Vita, Maya saw genuine happiness return to the older woman's face. It wasn't Daniel's wealth that comforted her. It was his respect. He waited until his mother sat before taking the chair beside her. A small gesture, yet every employee noticed it. Powerful men usually expected others to serve them. Daniel served his mother first. Maya couldn't stop watching. She had expected arrogance. Instead, she saw gratitude. The contradiction unsettled her more than the bodyguards. Daniel reached for the untouched glass of water Maya had offered earlier. He slid it toward Eleanor. "You should drink." "Thank you." She smiled at him exactly as she had smiled at Maya. Without hierarchy. Without conditions. Only affection. Daniel looked toward Maya once more. "You brought her this?" "Yes, sir." "After everyone else ignored her?" Maya hesitated. "I did what I hoped someone would do for my grandmother." Daniel remained silent. Those words lingered in the air far longer than anyone expected. Across the room, Victoria Hayes shifted uncomfortably. She whispered to her husband, "This has become completely ridiculous." Unfortunately for her, Daniel heard every syllable. He slowly turned. "Ridiculous?" Victoria forced another practiced smile. "I only meant this as being blown out of proportion." She shrugged elegantly. "No one actually harmed your mother." Daniel studied her without blinking. "What do you consider harm?" She laughed nervously. "There were words, perhaps. But surely successful people don't become emotional over a few comments." Daniel leaned back slightly. His face revealed nothing. "When I was 8 years old," he began quietly, "my mother worked 3 cleaning jobs. No one interrupted. I remember waiting outside one office building because she couldn't afford childcare." His eyes remained fixed on Victoria. "One afternoon, I watched a businessman throw his coffee cup onto the floor. The room grew even quieter. He looked directly at my mother and said." Daniel paused. "Clean it. That's what people like you are for." His voice never changed. He forgot the incident before reaching the elevator. Daniel folded his hands. "My mother remembered it for 20 years. Victoria's confident smile slowly disappeared. Daniel continued. "People who have never been humiliated believe words disappear. They don't. They simply move into someone's heart and stay there." No one in Bella Vita dared speak. Maya felt her throat tighten. She glanced toward Eleanor. The older woman lowered her eyes. Not because she was ashamed, because she knew exactly which memory her son had carried all these years. At that moment, Brandon hurried back, breathing heavily, carrying a tablet connected to the restaurant's surveillance system. "I found the footage, sir." His hands were shaking. Daniel accepted the tablet, but didn't immediately press play. Instead, he looked around the dining room one final time. At the wealthy guests. At Victoria. At Brandon. At the waitstaff standing silently against the walls. Then his gaze stopped on Maya. "You stood beside my mother when everyone else stepped away." He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Now let's see whether this room has the courage to stand beside the truth." The video began without sound. Black and white security footage filled the tablet screen as Daniel placed it on the table where everyone could see. The timestamp showed exactly 6:54 p.m. His mother entered the restaurant alone. She paused politely near the entrance. She smiled. She waited. Nothing more. Daniel watched without changing expression. The recording continued. The hostess searched the reservation list while Eleanor stood patiently with both hands resting on her worn handbag. Then Victoria Hayes appeared on the screen. Although the camera captured no audio, no one needed to hear the words. The mocking smile. The dismissive wave. The laughter from nearby tables. Every expression told the story. Daniel looked up. "What did she say?" No one answered. He asked again. "What did she say?" Victoria crossed her arms. "I don't remember the exact words." Daniel turned toward one of his security officers. "Audio." The man connected another file recovered from the restaurant's surveillance system. The room filled with familiar voices. "Oh, wonderful. Apparently anyone can wander into Bella Vita now." Soft laughter followed. Then another voice. "Maybe her son forgot she exists." More laughter. Daniel's eyes never left the screen. His mother stood exactly where she had been, smiling, pretending not to hear. The recording continued. Brandon approached. The manager's own voice echoed painfully through the dining room. "If there's no reservation under her name, she'll need to wait outside." Daniel glanced briefly toward Brandon. The manager's face had become almost colorless. Then another moment appeared. Maya walked into the frame, carrying a tray of water. She stopped beside Eleanor. She smiled. She spoke gently. She offered the elderly woman a chair. The audio captured every word. "Please don't worry, ma'am. We'll figure this out together." Daniel looked toward Maya. She lowered her eyes, suddenly uncomfortable, becoming the center of attention. The footage continued. Brandon's voice cut sharply through the speakers. I don't pay you to think. Another uncomfortable silence settled over the restaurant. Then Maya answered, so she's someone's mother. Daniel replayed that sentence. Once, twice, 3 times. Not because he hadn't heard it. Because everyone else needed to. So she's someone's mother. Those 5 words echoed through Bella Vita with greater force than every insult spoken before them. Daniel pressed pause. The image froze. Maya standing beside Eleanor. Everyone else standing away. He slowly placed the tablet on the table. No one recognized my mother. His voice remained calm. That's understandable. He folded his hands. No one knew who she was. His eyes swept across the guests. But every one of you knew exactly what she was. No one moved. A 70-year-old woman. Alone. Waiting for someone she loved. He paused. And you still chose cruelty. Victoria finally lost her composure. Oh, come on. She threw her hands into the air. It was harmless. Daniel looked at her. Harmless. Yes. It was a joke. Daniel nodded slowly. I've spent 20 years studying people. His gaze hardened. I've learned something interesting. The people who call humiliation a joke are almost never the ones being humiliated. Victoria opened her mouth to argue. Daniel raised one finger. She stopped speaking instantly. He looked instead toward Maya. When everyone else measured my mother by her clothes, you measured her by her humanity. Maya quietly shook her head. I only treated her the way I'd want someone to treat my grandmother. Daniel smiled faintly. And that's exactly why this room belongs to you far more than it belongs to those who laughed. For the first time that evening, several guests lowered their heads in shame. Some avoided looking at Eleanor. Others couldn't bear looking at Maya. The room had become painfully quiet. Not because Daniel Kong had revealed his power, but because the surveillance footage had revealed something far more uncomfortable. Who everyone had chosen to become when they believed no one important was watching. No one realized that Daniel Kong had already made his decision. The security footage had answered every question he needed answered. Not about his mother. About character. He slowly locked the tablet screen and handed it back to his chief of security. Thank you. The officer nodded once and stepped away. Daniel remained seated beside Eleanor for another quiet moment. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a neatly folded linen handkerchief. Without saying a word, he gently wiped a faint drop of water from the sleeve of her cardigan. The stain had come from the glass Maya had offered earlier. It was a tiny gesture, almost invisible, yet it spoke louder than any speech. Eleanor smiled. You still fuss over me. I always will. She patted his hand affectionately. You've become such an important man. Daniel looked at her with quiet affection. Not to you. She laughed softly. No. To me. You're still the boy who cried because a stray kitten was hungry. Several members of the restaurant staff exchanged surprised glances. It was difficult to imagine the intimidating man before them as a compassionate little boy. Daniel smiled briefly. Then he stood. The warmth disappeared from his face. He turned toward Brandon. How long have you been the manager here? 3 years, sir. Were you trained to judge customers by their clothing? And no, sir. Were you trained to embarrass elderly guests in front of an audience? No, sir. Were you trained to silence employees who choose kindness? Brandon lowered his head. No, sir. Daniel nodded once. Then today's performance was entirely your own. The words landed like a judge's verdict. Brandon opened his mouth. I can explain. I've already listened. Daniel didn't raise his voice. I've watched. I've heard. And now, I understand. He turned toward Victoria Hayes. You. She forced a smile that looked painfully fragile. Mr. Kong, surely this misunderstanding doesn't deserve to become something larger. Daniel studied her for several seconds. My mother spent 35 years teaching children in a public school before retiring. Victoria blinked. Daniel continued. Thousands of students called her Mrs. Kong. Many became doctors, lawyers, teachers, police officers. He glanced toward Eleanor. She taught them that respect costs nothing. His eyes returned to Victoria. You apparently learned something else. Victoria's face flushed. I never intended to hurt anyone. Daniel nodded slowly. I believe you. Relief briefly crossed her face. Then he finished the sentence. You intended to entertain yourself. The relief vanished instantly. Daniel stepped closer. The tragedy is not that you recognized my mother as poor. The tragedy is that you decided poor people deserve less dignity. No one dared breathe. Daniel looked across the dining room. There is a dangerous illusion among successful people. They begin believing respect is something wealth creates. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. It isn't. Wealth simply reveals whether respect was there to begin with. His gaze found Maya once again. She stood quietly near the entrance exactly where she had first defended Eleanor. She hadn't interrupted, hadn't tried to receive recognition. She simply listened. Daniel admired that. Because people who genuinely acted from kindness rarely advertised it. He walked toward her. The bodyguards instinctively followed. He raised one hand. They stopped immediately. The distance between Daniel and Maya became only a few feet. Miss Brooks. Yes, sir. When you defended my mother, did you know who she was? No. Would you have acted differently if she had been homeless? Maya answered without hesitation. No, sir. Daniel looked directly into her eyes. Why? She smiled gently. Because loneliness looks the same in every neighborhood. Silence. Even Eleanor's eyes became moist. Daniel stood completely still. Among all the expensive conversations he had heard in boardrooms, political dinners, and private negotiations, he could not remember a sentence wiser than the one spoken by a waitress wearing a simple black apron. And in that quiet moment, he realized Bella Vita had not only revealed who deserved accountability, it had revealed someone whose integrity could never be purchased. For nearly a minute, Daniel Kong said nothing. The silence was deliberate. He had learned long ago that people often revealed more while waiting for a verdict than they ever admitted under questioning. Brandon stood rigidly beside the reception desk, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Victoria Hayes stared into her untouched champagne, the confidence that had carried her through the evening dissolving one uncomfortable second at a time. The guests remained motionless. No one wanted to be the first person to leave. Finally, Daniel spoke. Miss Brooks. Maya looked up. Yes, sir. How long have you worked here? 11 months. Do you enjoy your job? The unexpected question caught her off guard. She smiled politely. I enjoy serving people. Daniel noticed she hadn't answered the question. He almost smiled. That's not what I asked. Maya hesitated. Then honesty won. I love serving people. She glanced briefly toward Brandon. I just don't always enjoy working here. Several employees quietly lowered their heads. They understood exactly what she meant. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate truthful answers. He reached into his jacket and removed a simple black business card. There was no company logo, only a name, Daniel Kong, along with a private number embossed in silver lettering. He held it out toward Maya. I'd like to offer you a position. She blinked. I'm sorry. My hospitality group owns 37 restaurants across the country. A ripple of surprise spread through the room. Very few people had known that Bella Vita's largest competitor belonged to Daniel. I need someone who understands hospitality. He paused. And after tonight, I know hospitality is something you practice, not something you memorize. Maya looked completely stunned. Sir, I don't have management experience. Daniel smiled faintly. I know. I've already reviewed your resume. Now everyone stared. When? Daniel answered matter-of-factly. My office investigated every employee after I entered the restaurant. Several bodyguards remained expressionless. Apparently, that level of preparation was perfectly ordinary. Daniel continued. You work nights to help your younger brother finish college. You volunteer twice a month at a senior community center. You've never received a customer complaint. Maya's eyes widened. You know all that. I know enough. He held out the card again. I can teach management. I cannot teach character. The words settled gently over the room. No one laughed. No one whispered. Because everyone knew they were true. Maya slowly accepted the card. Her hands trembled slightly. I don't know what to say. Daniel looked toward his mother. Eleanor smiled warmly. Say thank you if your heart tells you to. Maya nodded. Thank you. Then she surprised everyone. But I'd like to ask one favor. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What favor? She glanced toward the restaurant staff, standing silently against the walls. The dishwashers. The servers. The cooks. They're good people. They just follow whoever leads them. She looked briefly toward Brandon. If this place gets another chance, please don't let them lose their jobs because of someone else's decisions. A deep silence followed. Daniel had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions. He had watched politicians bargain for power. He had listened to powerful executives demand impossible concessions. Never once had someone used their greatest opportunity to ask mercy for others. Eleanor reached over, and gently squeezed Maya's hand. I knew there was something special about you the moment you brought me that glass of water. Daniel looked around the room, then toward Brandon. You've heard her request. The manager nodded, tears beginning to gather in his eyes. Yes, sir. Daniel's gaze became firm. Leadership is a privilege, not permission. If you ever manage people again, remember the waitress who showed more leadership than the manager. Brandon lowered his head completely. I will. For the first time that evening, Daniel believed him. Because humiliation changes very little, but genuine accountability sometimes changes everything. 3 months later, Bella Vita looked almost like a different restaurant. The marble floors still reflected the chandeliers. The piano still played softly every evening. The tables were still dressed in crisp white linen. But something invisible had changed. People smiled before speaking. Managers greeted every guest at the door. Employees no longer lowered their eyes whenever someone wealthy walked in. Respect had become part of the atmosphere. Not because of a new policy, because everyone remembered one unforgettable night. Brandon Cole no longer worked as general manager. True to Daniel's word, he had not been cast aside forever. Instead, he accepted a junior management position at another property owned by Daniel's hospitality group, where he spent months learning from supervisors who believed leadership began with service rather than authority. He accepted the opportunity without complaint. Humility had replaced pride. Victoria Hayes quietly withdrew from several charity boards after the incident became known among Manhattan's social circles. No newspaper ever reported what happened inside Bella Vita. It didn't need to. Reputation travels faster than headlines. As for Maya Brooks, she almost declined Daniel's offer. Not because she doubted herself, because she feared leaving the co-workers who had become like family. It was Eleanor who finally convinced her. My dear, she said during lunch one quiet afternoon, sometimes accepting a blessing is also an act of courage. So Maya accepted. 6 months later, she became director of guest experience across Daniel's restaurant group. She visited every location personally. She learned the names of dishwashers before executives. She greeted elderly customers herself whenever possible. And every new employee heard the same sentence during orientation. We don't serve important people. We remind every person that they are important. Daniel refused to remove those words from the training manual. One rainy Saturday, he visited a newly opened restaurant without announcing himself. He stood quietly near the entrance, watching Maya comfort an elderly man whose reservation had accidentally been misplaced. She offered him tea, pulled out a chair, listened, smiled, exactly as she had done months earlier with his mother. Nothing about her kindness had changed after receiving power. Daniel realized that was precisely why she deserved it. As they prepared to leave together, Eleanor slipped her arm through Maya's. You know, she said with a gentle laugh. Daniel always thought protecting people was his responsibility. She looked proudly at her son. Then he met someone who protected me before she even knew my name. Daniel smiled. I've negotiated with presidents. I've faced men who believed fear was the strongest form of influence. He looked at Maya. But that night, a waitress taught me that quiet courage can accomplish what power never could. Maya shook her head modestly. I didn't save anyone. You did, Eleanor replied softly. You protected my dignity. The three of them stood together outside the restaurant as evening rain shimmered beneath the city lights. People passing on the sidewalk would have seen only an elegantly dressed Korean businessman, his elderly mother, and a beautiful black woman laughing together. They would never know the story that connected them. But perhaps they didn't need to. Because some lessons are powerful precisely because they remain invisible. Daniel looked one last time toward the entrance of Bella Vita. Months earlier, it had been the doorway where strangers measured a woman by her clothes. Now it had become a place where every guest, regardless of age, race, or appearance, was welcomed with the same respect. He quietly reached for the restaurant door and held it open as his mother walked through first. Then Maya. He entered last. Exactly as he always would. Because the strongest people are never revealed by the power they possess. They are revealed by the dignity they protect in others. And that day, everyone who had witnessed what happened inside Bella Vita remembered something far more valuable than wealth, status, or fear. They remembered what dignity looks like.